Obama's messing things up.
Spending money we don't have.
Yeah.
Stimulus, Obamacare.
Yeah, and Joe Manchin supported it all.
Joe's not bad as governor, but when he's with Obama...
Yeah, he turns into Washington Joe.
And Washington Joe does whatever Obama wants.
Yeah, well, we better keep Joe Manchin right here in West Virginia.
Away from Washington.
Yep, it's the only way we're gonna stop Obama.
The National Republican Senatorial Committee is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Well, late last week, that ad for West Virginia Republican senatorial candidate businessman John Racy was pulled after charges that the apparent West Virginians there were actually South Philly actors recruited by the party to play Hicks. But such campaign shenanigans are nothing new, it turns out. Today we go back to the origins of media campaigning, which started out with an assault on a progressive insurgent in 1934. Take a look.
We want work! We want work! We want
Sometimes Hollywood mirrored the Great Depression. Other times, it denied it. But behind the scenes were people who used the power of movie making to manipulate Depression politics. 1934, an election year. In Washington, President Franklin Roosevelt, architect of the New Deal, offered hope and unleashed powerful expectations. America was torn between those who said Roosevelt was going too far and those who said not far enough. In California, one man, a writer, a socialist, a candidate who had never held public office, proposed to take the country further than Roosevelt would dare. 1934, the year Upton Sinclair promised the nation that he would end poverty in California.
And Hollywood kind of ended Sinclair's campaign. We'll find out more about that from our guest. Greg Mitchell is author of The Campaign of the Century, Upton Sinclair's Race for Governor of California and the Birth of Media Politics. He's also a writer-editor of the Media Fix blog at thenation.com. Greg, welcome back to GRITtv. Good to have you.
Very good to be
here. Say your book first came out in '92. Why reissue it now as if it's not obvious?
Well, of course, we're in the middle of an economic crisis like in 1934. We're here talking about campaign dirty tricks, and the 1934 race was the first use of the screen to destroy a candidate.
Now, that trailer indicates something sort of bad afoot, but tell us what happened, and then we'll go back to the cheerier part of the story, which was Sinclair's actual race. Was pretty exciting.
Right. Well, he won, believe it or not, the Democratic primary for governor of California in a landslide, and was, by all accounts, heading for victory in November. And the book really details this. It really was the birth of the modern political campaign, with the first real hiring of outside advertising and publicity consultants, spin doctors. All the tricks that we see today really came out of that race because of the perceived threat of the former socialist Sinclair. Sort of inspired this the modern campaign.
So you really had the Hollywood bigwigs, Louis B. Mayer, calling out all of the troops to make up newsreel footage, basically.
Well,
here's a very, very tiny clip, and there's more available, but here's one example of the kind of thing that was run during that race. 1934, folks.
I'm going to vote for Upton Sinclair. Will you tell us why? Upton Sinclair is the author of The Russian Government, and it worked out very well there, and I think it should do here.
The author of The Russian Government.
Well, what they did was, first the Moguls threatened to move to Florida. They also deducted one day's pay from all of the thousands of workers there to go into the Republicans' campaign. But they also created, and the sort of the amazing thing that I found and first revealed in the book, I actually located these newsreels, which were created by the saintly Irving Thalberg at MGM, later admitted that he made them. And what they basically did was, towards the end of the campaign, they created 3 newsreels that were a combination of, they hired actors to portray anti-Sinclair or even pro-Sinclair people to put them in the worst light. They took footage from old Hollywood movies and pretended they were news clips. And this mixture of these newsreels was devastating because people were not used to, it was really the birth of the modern attack ad. People weren't used to going into a movie theater and seeing newsreels that took a real political line. So they really thought, they believed everything that was in the newsreels, just like people might have done on television years ago.
And to roll back, why was Hollywood and many other people as well, why were they so threatened by Upton Sinclair?
Well, Sinclair, as I mentioned, was a former socialist. He decided he hadn't had success as a socialist candidate in the past, so he declared as a Democratic candidate. And instead of just running, in the primary, he inspired probably certainly the greatest mass movement in California history, and one of the greatest in the country, the End Poverty in California movement, or EPIC. And by the end of the campaign, they had literally thousands of chapters around the state. They had the Epic News newspaper had a circulation of 2 million, and it was a wild show of progressive support throughout the state. And like I said, it led to him sweeping the Democratic primary, and it really created the modern Democratic Party there. The Democratic Party had never been a progressive force out there, and ever since 1934. The Democratic Party has been dominated by liberals in California, and it all comes from this campaign.
Now, this is the guy that wrote The Jungle. He was an author. A lot of politicians since have talked about ending poverty and this and that. How did he say he would do it, or was it just vague? No,
he launched his campaign by writing a book called I, Governor of California, and How I Ended Poverty. Talk about something to live up to. But he laid out in this book exactly what he would do. It had to do with the production for use, where he would, as we see today, putting people at productive labor, farms, taking over shuttered factories, using unused farmland, trading goods, co-ops, providing funding to co-ops. But he also, before Roosevelt, said there would be old age pensions, there would be pensions for people who could not work, expanding benefits of all kinds. And the connection to today, I think, is as we saw with Obama. He took office on hope and change, but didn't lay out here's my 10 principles that I'm not going to compromise on. Imagine if he had taken office and said health reform with the public option, no compromise. But instead it was sort of vague and wishy-washy, and so when he didn't stand by most of these things, he lost this sort of what you might call a mass movement behind him from the election, and it's he's kind of frittered it away. And you have people who feel he doesn't stand for enough. You have a question in the book from Upton Sinclair where he asks, sort of rhetorically, can people use democracy for their own ends, in their own interests, or will they inevitably be fooled and lied to by powers bigger than themselves? Is the jury out or way in at this point? Well, I think it's always a question of how you achieve power, how you achieve reform, and you have the inevitable third party versus work within the Democratic Party debates that are still going on today. And but I think one of the points of the book is that you can work within an established party if you have a strong mass movement that makes demands. And sure enough, Sinclair ended up losing in November, but because of the mass movement behind him, he forever turned California towards the left. Even the reactionary Republican governor basically adopted a lot of the Sinclair program. So and FDR moved to the left. So the PR campaign manufacturing lies about him could stop him getting elected, but it couldn't stop the agenda he put forward. That's right, exactly. It really helped push FDR to the left, and a lot of what we owe today to the New Deal was inspired by Sinclair and 2 or 3 other movements around the country that pushed from the left. They didn't win, but they pushed from the left and created an extremely positive outcome. So take a very long view. It might seem as cold comfort to people who are facing the upset of some of their favorite candidates this year. Right. Any advice coming from the Sinclair campaign to people, maybe not at the presidential level, but at the state level, up against this mountain of money? Right. Well, of course, a lot of the complaint now is where's the left answer to the Tea Party populist activists, and so I think people need to get out there. It's probably too late for this year, but you need to outline firm principles, get candidates to sign off on firm principles, and you can really hold their feet to the fire. All right, Greg Mitchell has a piece on this very topic coming out in The Nation very soon. You'll be able to find it at thenation.com. Meanwhile, there's more on Sinclair's campaign at our website, GRITtv.org.